That's an easy one. Hello, everyone. A little bit of a switch up here. I'm going to be the one introducing the podcast episode today. We talked about our intuition last episode and some applicable ways to tap into our intuition. And today we're kind of doing a subject change in a way, but also one that does relate. We're going to talk about the law of attraction and the law of repulsion, and how that is integrated into our desire to change, as well as, the resistance we have to change and growth. Cool. Awesome. So I think one of the things that I really want to make sure that we talk about first is law of attraction and law of repulsion. We're not talking about the law of attraction in terms of manifestation. That can be in a later episode, but really what we're talking about more is if you're thinking of batteries, you have a plus and a minus, and those two do attract each other because they are different. But if you're taking a negative charged battery side and the other negative charged battery side, that ends up being two energy forces that repel each other. So really what we're talking about more is what we're attracted to in the energy pull there, and as well as what we aren't attracted to, what we tend to repel today.
Awesome. Okay, so law of attraction, that we are drawn to certain things. But are there principles around which we are drawn to things? Like, is there a reason that we're drawn to certain things? Is it, intuition driven, or also it might be helpful to give an example of what that could look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something also to mention before is that we are a sum of multiple parts. So multiplicity is the word, but our whole being has parts of us that are different ages, that have different interests, different talents. There's a quote by Richard Schwartz here that we have, that a part is not just a temporary emotional state or habitual thought pattern. Instead, it is a discrete and autonomous mental system that has an idiosyncratic range of emotion, style of expression, set of abilities, desires, and view of the world. So like I was saying before, really what it's talking about is there are multiple parts of us that function and serve different purposes and feel the attraction or the repulsion that we're talking about. And so an example of attraction is that there are parts of us inside that want to be like what we are not currently. So the growth change, for example, something that I want to be is up and running a life coaching business, for example. This is something that I want that I don't currently have, but I'm attracted to it because of parts of me that feel that that's purpose driven. Repulsion is by definition the force with which bodies, particles, or like forces repel one another. So that same example is there are also parts of me that don't like that idea because that doesn't feel safe, or that feels scary, or I'm fearful because I don't really know what that looks like. There's uncertainty in that area. So there are parts within me that actually are trying to repel that away, but because they so deeply want to remain the same. So like I was saying with the batteries, there are parts that feel safe in the same, but those parts of me that are attraction to the life coaching now are having to battle the repulsion of remaining the same with those parts that want to stay the same.
I think that that is a great point on the fact that we aren't totally united at times, and it helps release some of the guilt around that. When I look at people who I deem as successful, I think that they have this really clear vision of what it is that they want, and that they've been able to siphon all of their efforts directly towards this one thing. And it can seem as if they're operating at a higher level of unity within themselves than I feel like I can access within myself, because I more often relate to those feelings of ambivalence where I feel drawn to something and strongly, not just like a passing interest, but strongly drawn to something. But at the same time, I feel equally terrified of that thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great example as well. And I think what we're both trying to talk about here is the fact that we can be outside of those parts. So understanding that we're gonna have parts of ourselves that are what I like to call protector parts. Mastin Kipp talks a lot about protector parts because the the main point in addressing parts is also making sure that we don't think that we have bad parts. Like because we have fear and because we're, scared to move forward, it's not that the parts of us that want to keep us where we're at are bad parts. They're serving a protective purpose because something, an experience before, or what you've been taught or experienced in terms of what you've seen other people go through, those parts that we have are really just there to protect us. But then the other part that we're talking about, the other side, the other aspects of us are those expansion parts, those parts of us that want to grow and change and expand into our purpose that we see in these visions. And it's like this adrenaline rush. It's like, wow, this is so exciting and we're filled. And it's like, how can those two things exist at once? And really understanding that we have multiple parts, but we can be with our parts and not in our parts, like taken over by whether it's the protector parts or the expansion parts. We can almost step out as a third party and understand, all right, this part of me is protecting me. Okay, what is that? And how can I provide this part of me a corrective emotional experience to come with me with the expansion parts to grow and change?
And I think like the people who are successful or do really well at what they do, it's because that they've come to accept that they can have that split internally, and but also acknowledge and accept the fear. We've watched a few movies lately of people doing like extreme sports, like the kayaking, for instance. I started watching a video the other day about a guy who does like free climbing. And I feel like I never understood why people put themselves in those situations. But now I think it's an opportunity to face fear really head on, but also clearly have an objective that causes more of that fear to come up, but to be able to sit in it and feel it, not identify with it, and then be able to choose not to operate out of the fear. So being able to see those conflicting, what can seem conflicting parts exist together, because you realize that all the parts are there to serve you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's those examples really do. When I think about writing a vision, I'm in this process where I'm really trying to clarify my vision. And I feel my protector parts come up with that a lot. Like I know I see what I want. And that growth, that change really does cause parts of me to feel unsafe. And so staying the same and not necessarily creating the vision yet or doing the extreme physical activity, like that's they're the same in my mind. Like doing something so extreme physically, like these kayaking experiences that these people are having, for me, that my experience is creating a vision and going after that. It's creating the same kind of tension of my parts where I so deeply want to go after that, and my protector parts feel really unsafe, so I'm having to sit in that tension, time under tension. And so it's like in that tension is really where the growth and the change can truly occur inside the transformative part, if we're able to, like you're saying, step out and understand that those two are going to exist a lot, and understanding your particular set of ambivalent parts when they show up, what the routine is of them inserting themselves into your awareness, what tends to trigger them to come up, but also how can I honor all of my parts by bringing the parts of me that feel scared and moving into the expansive part, which is truly our deepest desire, which is the thing that we need to do to survive, to fulfill our purpose, to move forward and not be stagnant. How do we get our whole being to start trusting that this process isn't an unsafe process?
So the contrast between attraction and repulsion is the things that we're attracted to are often those things that are different from us. So then the things that repulse us are the things that are similar to us.
Right.
But we really feel dead when we're stagnant. So if we operate off the basis that our primary purpose in life is to grow, to evolve, like that has been the history of the world, is evolution. If our goal is to evolve, then I think we can kind of go back to that when we run into those walls of like, I feel the discomfort of looking at the potential of pursuing this new opportunity that scares me, but I know that that is the greater good because it is in alignment with growth. Whereas this other thing that feels good and safe isn't in alignment with growth. I think I just want to make that differentiation because we talked about intuition last time. And if you feel like you have two voices coming from inside of you, both voices, but they're telling you something different, how do you know which one to listen to?
That's, I think you made that point to me earlier in the last couple of days, where when you set a vision, it doesn't mean it has to be a concrete thing. It can be flexible. It can be, something I see as the goal now, but doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be what I really want in the right now, because then when I do get into those places, I know what the goal is. I know what I want. And that then can help me in those really sticky situations where you're like, I hear this and I hear this and I feel this, and well, what is this? And it's like you kind of get overwhelmed and, analysis paralysis, instead of, okay, this is the goal and which decision here is going to be the one to follow to get there, but honoring that this other part needs to be heard too, I guess, is the part that I want to add in there too. Is like making sure that we're not just assuming the parts that don't want us to grow are bad and that we can't
Mm.
bring them with us, because our whole being is all of these parts.
So the parts really, they're all for you. They're all serving you in some way. They've all gotten you this far in life. And we need to respect them as important, but we don't have to put them in the driver's seat. Like we can choose which voice is in the driver's seat. And I don't want to confuse that because I think there's actual mental disorders that we know of, like mental health disorders, where people actually feel that their personality is divided. And this is not the same as that. This is having two feelings, voices within that can be contradictory, but you're all still of the same part. You're still the same person. It's may feel more like I feel excited, but also scared, like being on a roller coaster. You can have both of those feelings exist at the same time, but it's not having two separate personalities speak into your life. I just want to like create that clarification because I think that could be confusing, or if someone hasn't really become familiar with the idea of like protector parts, it can feel kind of strange to think that there's like multiple different like people or personas within your person.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think neuroplasticity is a good thing to kind of talk about it with that. That neuroplasticity is speaking to the ability to change our nervous system, or kind of rewire. And so protector parts are really, we can talk like neuroception is describes how your neural circuits distinguish whether situations or people or experiences are safe. It's your body, your nervous system's assessment of your current environment, and that can it can change because of neuroplasticity. So those protector parts that are in your nervous system that are causing the anxiousness or the rapid heart rate or the breathing in the chest, or your fight or flight, or you're just like completely in fawn and frozen. It's like those parts are the parts that are protecting you from what is being perceived as an unsafe environment. And so with the ability to understand that it's your body's response, physical response to an environment perceived as unsafe, we can start to then bring in the parts that we know are associated with growth and have them meet each other. So we can know and have the corrective emotional experience where the protector parts are now able to see a totally different end result, or feel safe in this what is perceived to be unsafe place, because it's a new experience to tie it to, if that makes sense. So I just think that was such a good point, but just maybe adding in a little bit more of that science there, where it's not necessarily two personalities. It's like your body has been through an experience, and so now you have protector parts because you experienced something that now you need to be protected from again. And so any kind of environment or person or situation that your body's perceiving as the same as what happened before, now that's what the good in that part is. It's protecting you from having that same experience. But when your expansive parts, when your growth parts come in and your heart shows, hey, this is a safe environment and we're growing towards this goal, and you can do it. It's a different experience. It's like having the conversation with the parts of you that feel like they're in an unsafe place.
Yeah, and maybe even I think unsafe can be equated to unknown sometimes. Like
Mm.
if it's something that's not what we anticipated, that can trigger fear pretty immediately, in which case, like, one of those protector parts may come up. Like if we have this idea of how things are going to play out, and then something comes up that is unexpected, we can kind of like revert to a pattern that has protected us from the unknown in the past. So I think that there's just like different ways to look at it, and that it might show up in your life. But I just challenge you to kind of think about how these parts show up, and how in different situations you might notice that different parts of you show up in order to protect you, and then just to stop and like honor them and thank them for what they're doing, but be in the driver's seat in terms of deciding which part of you gets to dictate your actions.
Yeah, that's good. Do you want to speak to like interoceptive awareness a little bit with that? Like being able to identify some of those things that come up?
Yeah, so we've talked before about having like thoughts and emotions, and being able to kind of step back and see them come across the screen of your mind, and not necessarily identify with them. Like feeling anger, being able to step outside of it and say, okay, I feel anger, something in this environment or situation or energy field triggered some anger for me. Why? Then you get to start that self-reflective process a little bit more quickly, and decide whether or not anger is going to be the determinant of your actions. And that requires interoceptive awareness. So interoceptive awareness is being able to understand the signals that your body is sending you. So your body and mind are sending you. So in that internal awareness of what's going on within you. And a lot of times when we're looking at other people, all we see is this external reaction. Like you could get really angry at me, and all I'm saying is like, you're mad at what I just did. I'm not able to see what's going on inside of you. But a lot of times, unless you've taken the time to develop interoceptive awareness, you aren't either. You just see your anger, and then your response is, "Oh, I got mad again. I just like let my anger get the best of me again." Or you roll with it, and then it's just like, yeah, I am mad, and then let the anger take over your being. But if you have fostered interoceptive awareness, it's that being able to understand that everything that you're experiencing internally is telling you something.
Yeah. I I think one of mine, and just an example of that for me, is that I wrote a blog post about this, is my, and I've talked about this multiple times too, is that I tend to get into this productive procrastination. And so Procat procrastivity was actually a word that I just heard for the first time the other day, and it's, I feel like I hear this a lot. Like people can relate to this procrastivity, which is a combination of procrastinate and activity. So this term really means that you're always busy but never seeming to make any kind of headway. And so for me, I feel that, and what I r- now can really start to become aware of is when I enter into that. So just like you're talking about anger, it's like now that I've improved my interoceptive awareness as well as my neuroception to my body's like response to the environment, I'm now able to see more quickly and also address the why behind why I'm entering into procrastivity right in the moment, to be able to self-reflect, bring my parts, all my parts together to kind of assess the situation, for lack of a better word, and then implement the intention that I have, the goal, the vision, and apply it to the meaning that I found and why I was entering into this procrastivity. So really, I guess something that I've learned to do in that is when I am aware and I can find the why, then I can understand that I have a particular thing I go to when I'm feeling like unknown, the unknown is too overwhelming, or I'm uncertain or unsafe, whatever word you want to use there. I can understand that this particular, event or amount of information or task is causing me to enter into procrastivity because I'm like fearful of doing it. That I then understand I can put in implementation, intention, habit, or thing that I do to make sure that I address my protector parts in that moment, but I still am able to move forward and actually take steps towards the headway to the important life goals that I have, instead of getting stuck in procrastivity for like multiple weeks and feeling stuck and then having that repulsion literally existing in my body because I'm not following what I'm attracted to.
Yeah. So I've talked before about my like draw to be super efficient, and how I kind of took that too far, where I kind of started seeing myself as like this robot that I just needed to program to get as much done as possible in the shortest time frame possible, just be a productivity machine. And I love the quote, "We're not physical beings on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings on a physical journey." When I think about that, if you think about yourself as a spiritual being that is good from the start, you're good. You're on a physical journey that's imperfect, and your body and mind, the physical parts, are having to learn, to relearn things that we probably knew all along, but it's having to learn. And so the idea of implementing like habits or strategies is a way to make it a little bit easier for your programmable side, that physical side, to more quickly come back into alignment with your spiritual side. So for you, like if that procrastivity starts creeping in, having like a set of actions that once you're aware of it, because you've fostered that interoception, aware of it, implementing your action set to then realign your behaviors with what you know is most true for your soul. I think that that's a really helpful way to look at things that are more tangible, like habit stacking or building habits or having routines, because we are, like, just like the protector parts, we have so many programs running in our bodies and minds because we can't just constantly take in everything around us all the time as new information. We would be so overwhelmed for the rest of our lives. We have to be able to pick out what's important and what's not. But there's things that have come up as being important because in our past they've meant something that now we're applying a meaning to, and they might not. So being able to kind of use your natural tendency to be a creature of habit to trigger those opportunities to rewire and come back into alignment with your interoception and realign with, okay, what parts of me are speaking right now? Like, just cueing yourself back into that state of awareness, I think, can be really, really helpful. And then it removes that guilt of sitting in, oh, now I'm just, procrastinating again. I'm just back to my same habits again. It's like, no, that thing, that habit of procrastivity has served you to protect you in a way. It's just not working for you now. So let's find another way to come out of that and reprogram a new habit that is more in alignment with what you are attracted to and drawn to and will cause you to grow.
Yeah, I think you saying the spiritual connection to the physical really resonated with me. And I'm hoping it resonated elsewhere as well, because that makes a lot of sense in explaining all of this, that there is that spiritual part of us that is so excited and eager to continue growing and expanding and creating and all of these things. But then we've experienced physical things in our life that keep our nervous system kind of stuck, like you're saying. And something that I think also comes with the removal of all that guilt and shame you're talking about is that when you have that habit to implement, you're then reducing the frequency, intensity, and duration of the time that you're in the activity, procrastivity, but you're also able to then understand really why it comes up, and it doesn't feel as heavy every single time. So you're able to really, over time, be able to almost remove that because you brought your protector parts completely into the safeness, the known, the exciting feeling of expansion and creation, just because you've completely gotten the frequency of the times that your my procrastivity is occurring, the how long, the duration that you're actually in it, and then the intensity of the feelings that come with it, like the guilt and the shame. I think when we have a habit we can implement that is aligned with the growth expansive side, the staying the same parts jump on board with you and get to be excited with you, with the other parts of you, for growth and change and expansion.
Yeah, I think that cutting the time short in that state is a great point. Like, you've practiced procrastivity. I think when we think about that, the things that we do over and over again, those are things that we've practiced. So we're really good at them. I'm doing this course on mindfulness, and he talked about, the tendency to feel guilty around not being able to stay mindful and aware of the present moment. And it's like we practice multitasking every day since probably middle school, if not by high school, for sure. We're practicing multitasking. So we're not practicing mindful awareness of one thing. For years and years and years, we're practicing multitasking. So why would we kick ourselves for having a hard time getting into that state? It's like you just haven't practiced it. But being able to implement a new behavior, yeah, you might go into that certain behavior. You might go into multitasking and forget to be aware, but then you might have a trigger remind you. Like, that's why it's good to have like alarms on your phone or some kind of physical, tangible reminder to get your physical self's attention to get back in alignment with what it is that you want as a spiritual being, which is to be more mindful. So
Mhm.
I've been doing that when I wash dishes, as silly as it sounds, is using it as a mindfulness practice so that my cue is like, okay, when I'm washing dishes, I'm just really aware of what I'm doing and how it feels. And that's just one thing. But when I do it, I feel really satisfied. And that just reinforces that neural pathway. Like we're talking about the neuroplasticity. You have to keep doing it to reinforce it. And when you start to recognize, oh, this does serve me, that other thing doesn't serve me as much as this anymore, then that'll start to become your natural behavior. That's really the science of building habits, is like you have to, in a way, prove to yourself that this will have a positive outcome, more positive than the habit you're already doing. But you have to put in the
Right.
time, because that habit that you have now has been filling a role for quite a time.
Yeah, that's so good. That really hits home for me as an athlete. The things you practice, you create drills as a coach to implement practice in the thing that you want to get better at. And so we have, freshmen that come in that have a particular way. For me personally, the way that I like to coach passing is outside of the body for volleyball players. And some come in passing in the middle of their bodies, and they've been passing in the middle of their bodies for 18 years of their life at this point. And it's like the number of times that they're practicing passing outside the body, they'll get to a place where they pass outside their body, 98% of the time. And it's a it requires the understanding that you're gonna fail a lot of the time, and that's good because those failing opportunities are opportunities to learn and feel what it feels like to pass outside the body and just grow in that discomfort. Um, and so you talking about practicing from a coaching perspective, I think it's interesting because we can be our own coach in this way as well. It's like what drills, dishwashing, am I going to implement mindfulness into to start changing these behaviors to what I ultimately want, the way to grow, the way to change. It's like I can create my own drills for myself and put myself in that amount of time, whether it's 30 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes, but this drill that I'm doing is going to give me repetition at the skill that I want to improve, to the point where then it just becomes this natural habit, like you're saying.
Exactly. So we kind of started out this discussion talking about the law of attraction repulsion. So we're attracted to things that are different than us because inherent in that is the possibility of growth, which is our probably most natural desire. We're often repulsed by the things that are very similar to us or the sameness, because we recognize that as lack. We see the lack in that. But within that, we have this tension of fearing growth. And that's where we can see those inner parts, those protective parts come up and start to give us some potentially conflicting feelings about what we need to do and want to do and what we're afraid to do, and how all of that can exist at once in this ambivalent state. We talked about interoceptive awareness and how it's important that you develop the skill, you practice the skill of stepping outside of those feelings and different states and become aware of how each one is serving you, and then implement action steps in order to trigger yourself back into a behavior that is in alignment with your deepest desire, which usually is some form of growth.
Totally. I think that's great.
So we talked about being with your parts instead of in them. Do you want to talk about some examples of these implementation intentions?
Yeah, I think just some of the things that we had mentioned before. For you, you said that you're inserting mindfulness practices when you're washing the dishes to be more present. That's something you struggle with, is not being present, and it has allowed you to maybe get into a place where you're not necessarily growing because you're practicing those same patterns that are keeping you the same. So inserting those new patterns of behavior really have allowed you to decrease the frequency, duration, and intensity of the parts that come up when you're feeling growth. And I think some other things for me, I know that I meditate when I start to get into a place where I'm in procrastivity. I go meditate, I reset myself, I get myself out of that, and then I'm able to move forward. And something that's really important is that the more interoceptive awareness that you can bring in, the more neuroception you're able to improve, which means that neuroplasticity, your ability to change your actual pathways is possible, which then allows for, again, growth, expansion, all these things that we're mentioning. And so really, I think the next step, and we're going to put some questions in the comments below, but we have some questions that really dive a little bit deeper into the reflective part that allow you to begin understanding your own ambivalent parts and when things start to potentially insert themselves as a roadblock to your growth, your expansion, and overall what your heart truly desires.
That's great. So I would love to hear your guys's comments, feedback on this, and just really challenge you to take the time this week to recognize where you want to grow, and then also accepting the fear that comes with that as part of that protective response, that it's normal, it's good. And fear is often the thing that we can kind of lean into or follow because it usually indicates exactly where we need to go. So you can start to appreciate it and use it as just another signal. Again, building that interoceptive awareness, seeing every experience, emotional experience, thought pattern as a signal to assist you in this life. And if it doesn't assist you, that you do have the power to rewrite it into something that really does help you.
So good.
So we will post those questions in the comments below. Would highly recommend journaling on this week and then reflecting on it throughout the week, really looking at those areas in which fear come up and being able to step outside, thank your parts for protecting you, but then recognize where they no longer have to be the things dictating your decision making. And would love to hear your feedback on how that goes after this week. So thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment below, and we will be back to you next week.